they see that it says there. Romans 1, go read it. It says Jesus didn't appear as the Son of God until after the resurrection. But he always was. He appeared. So if we wanted to use that Greek language, what Paul would have said if he would have used that same Greek word that John used, is he would have said, Jesus became the Son of God after the resurrection. That's how it would sound.
Yeah. Right.
Now, does that mean he wasn't before? No, it doesn't.
Right.
And so what we've done is, and listen, just so there's no one's confused, good men and women who love God have said things that aren't exactly the right way. Me too.
Oh, yeah.
So this doesn't mean that they're malicious or they don't want to know the truth or that they're not out there from a pure heart speaking the best that they know the gospel. So when we're straightening these things out, it's not as if these people are malicious or any of that, right? We can only know anything by the Spirit of God, right? And it's just God coming to straighten the thing out.
Right.
But it's like the way we preach the gospel has really not fit with the way God would preach the gospel. Right? It just doesn't fit.
Right.
And we see how God would preach the gospel because we see the way he preached it to Abraham.
Yeah.
God also preached the gospel to Jesus. Right? The good news. That the death that was in the world wouldn't conquer him.
Yeah.
The good news that he wouldn't let it conquer him. The good news that he would never let his soul stay in Hades. That he wouldn't allow his body to see corruption. That he wouldn't abhor him when he was in his affliction. That's what we think. I mean, that's why our sins, when we sin, until we get a revelation that sin has been forgiven and we're not the kind of being that's defined by what we see manifest in our flesh.
Right.
The reason sin torments us is because it's the fruit of death.
Sure.
And when we see it, we know it's not the fruit of life. And that torments us.
Oh, that's
Because we're a being created for life and not for death.
Yeah,
So anytime we see any fruit in our life that isn't consistent with death, it's trying to move on our souls.
Yeah.
And it's trying to speak a word about us and what God thinks of us and what it means about us that we now have this death. Right? That's what it's trying to do.
Sure.
And that's why what God did in Jesus is so powerful. Because God condemned the death that was tormenting our souls in the flesh of Jesus. That means he judged against it. He conquered it in the flesh of Jesus. And now we see our death. Not his death, our death. We see that our death was conquered in his body in the resurrection.
Right.
And you know what that does in our hearts? It wraps our hearts in light and life.
Yes.
And now we begin believing that we have all things that pertain to life and godliness. And so whenever we encounter some corruption in this world, or we see some fruit that we don't think is consistent with life, our hearts are clothed in light and life. And so our hearts aren't tormented by that because our hope is the Lord.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Your hope
Your hope
isn't the good fruit you can bring forth.
Right.
I'm so sorry. God's hope isn't the good fruit you could bring forth.
Right.
God's hope that you could be raised from the dead and live eternally with him is not the good fruit you can bring forth. That's not his hope.
His life in you.
Go ahead, Mo.
I was just going